Jeremy Corbyn ha sido miembro del Parlamento británico desde hace más de 40 años, representando al distrito de Islington North, y es hoy también miembro del Parlamento del Consejo de Europa. Fue electo en 2 ocasiones dirigente nacional del Partido Laborista en 2015 y 2020, y fue 2 veces candidato a primer ministro del Reino Unido. Tiene una vasta trayectoria como promotor de la paz y defensor de los derechos humanos, incluyendo su destacada participación en la campaña por el desarme nuclear, el Comité de Solidaridad con Palestina, el Consejo de Derechos Humanos de las Naciones Unidas, la organización Stop the War, así como su trabajo permanente con sindicatos, pueblos originarios y movimientos sociales alrededor del mundo. Fue recipiendario del Sean McBride Peace Prize y otros reconocimientos internacionales por su trabajo a favor de la paz mundial. Es también director y fundador del Peace and Justice Project, organización internacional con sede en Londres. Es autor de numerosos textos y su libro más reciente se titula Monstrous Anger of the Guns: How the Global Arms Trade is Running the World and What We Can Do About It.
Well, here we are with a great friend, personal friend, a great friend of Mexico, a real social leader, a real political visionary. Jeremy Corbyn, welcome to Diálogos por la Democracia.
Thank you for inviting me. Great to be here. And what a brilliant, evocative, but sad exhibition there is here. It's great to be doing it here.
This is the Memorial de 68. We're here in the Centro Cultural Tlatelolco, a very appropriate place to receive you. Where were you in 68? Do you remember 68?
Yes, I do absolutely remember. I was living in Jamaica. I was teaching in a school, Kingston College, and we were following everything that was going on as best we could. Remember, there was much limited, there was no internet, nothing like that, so getting information was more difficult. And we followed the student uprising, and we followed the Olympic Games, and we remember John Carlos and Tommy Smith doing that. And
on the television.
That was on television, yeah. And that was very popular in Jamaica, as you would imagine.
Of course.
And it was a year where we just seemed to be observing the world. We were the death of Bobby Kennedy, the killing of Bobby Kennedy, and the killing of Martin Luther King, and the uprising in Paris. And I remember reading about all this at a distance, and I wrote a poem about it as well.
Really?
At the time, yeah.
Did you publish that poem?
Well, I sent it to the New Statesman magazine, and they refused to publish it. So I've told them they've got one more chance. If I can find the original script of it, I'll send it to them. Will they publish it? If not, that's it. They're off the shift.
But you haven't found it?
I've got most of it, yeah.
Yeah? All right. So
And
it's coming out.
I can remember quite a lot of it as well.
And why were you in Jamaica in 1968?
I was a volunteer for a group called Voluntary Service Overseas, and my job was doing youth work and teaching geography to 12-year-olds and taking the young people, it was boys' school, out on hikes up Blue Mountain Peak. So it was an amazing time for me. And I played football for the school, and I did all sorts of things for them. So it was great.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's those of us who are watching, please visit this wonderful exhibition about.
But that was the end of my football career. I gave up.
It was the end of your football career? You don't play today? No?
I gave up after that. I clearly wasn't going to get into Arsenal, so that was the point.
And now you're a major figure in the international left. I was following very closely the most recent election, concerned about the efforts by the Labour Party to exclude you. Well, they did try to exclude you, but you stood firm and got to the finish line and won your district once again in Islington North. How many years have you been a parliamentarian from there?
I was first elected for Islington North in 1983.
83.
Yeah, which was the difficult election. That was when Margaret Thatcher increased a majority. The Labour vote was split between the Social Democratic Party and the Labour Party. I was elected with a majority. It wasn't huge, but enough, and got elected as a first-time MP. And I've been in the Labour Party ever since. And now what's happened over the past few years has been this, that I led the Labour Party, as you know, until 2020. We lost the 2019 election. I then stood down as leader. And now 6 months later, I was suspended from party membership on abominable and false allegations. I was reinstated unanimously by the National Executive. And then on the edict of the leader, Keir Starmer, I was then removed from the parliamentary caucus. And therefore, 2 years later, he then moved. I was not fit to be a member of parliament. For
on what basis? What grounds was he arguing?
He didn't give any grounds other than they had to consider the greater needs of the party over the needs of the individual.
It sounded scared by your radical politics, or
nothing specified, nothing said, just that. And I was therefore denied the right to be a candidate. The election comes in May, end of May, when the Prime Minister, then Prime Minister Sunak, announces the election. I understand that Islington North Party is about to have a short list of candidates imposed upon it, of which I would not be one. So, and under party rules, the sitting MP is automatically on the short list. So I wrote to the General Secretary and said, I wish my name to be included. He wrote back and said, it's not and it can't be. So I wrote back and said, could you explain my routes for appeal against this irrational decision? And he wrote back and said, dear Mr. Corbyn, the rules of natural justice no longer apply to the Labour Party. There is no rule.
You have this in writing?
I do. There is no appeal. That's it. So I said, okay, that's it. So I announced that I would run as an independent candidate, and I would allow the people of Islington North to make the decision. So I'm going back to the people, your choice. You've either got somebody the Labour Party imposes or you got me. And we then launched our campaign. At that point, we had nothing. I rented a room to hired a room to put the campaign in and appealed for funds. And we had exceeded what we needed by 5 o'clock that day. Money, sufficient money came in to run the campaign. And we then got campaigning, and hundreds, no, thousands of people volunteered. And we knocked on every door 2-3 times. We talked to everybody, and we had 8 open air rallies around the constituency. And on voting day itself, we turned out the vote, and we won by 8,000. The Labour Party spent a lot of money, 50% of the vote.
15%?
50% of the vote.
Against in the second place?
35.
35, there you go.
The Labour candidate was a strange choice. He is a health service private entrepreneur who believes that the NHS would be better run in private hands.
The NHS is the National Health Service, for our Mexican audience, right?
free at the point of use for everybody. My record is very clear on the National Health Service. And so I said to the people, listen, guys, you've got a choice. You either want this guy who wants to sell off your health service, or you've got me.
Right. Very indicative of what's happened with the Labour Party. Now, internationally, for Mexico, this was touted as a great success. The return of the left with Keir Starmer, the Labour Party coming back in. That was what the headline said. But I was telling friends, no, well, yes, great victory by Jeremy Corbyn, but Keir Starmer is not exactly a visionary politician, right? Or what's your opinion?
Well, before we come on to that, there were 4 other candidates elected as independents who were not well known. They fought their campaign mainly on the issue of a ceasefire in Gaza and ending arms supplies to Israel to bring about that ceasefire. And they were elected. So there's now 5 of us as independents, and we work with the Greens, who are more radical than the Greens are in other places. And obviously we work with some of the Labour left. Well, so Labour wins the election, Starmer forms a government, and an economic statement is made by Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, that's the equivalent of the Treasury Ministry, and announces that to save money and stabilise the market, she will take away the winter fuel allowance for all people, all older people. It's a universal benefit, and it would be restricted to those whose total income is less than £10,500 a year, which is less than the minimum wage. It's a very low income. And this was then forced on a vote in Parliament on an amendment to the government programme. I obviously voted against the removal of such a thing. Those Labour MPs that voted against were immediately removed from the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Really?
So within 2 votes in Parliament, Starmer had already removed 7 MPs.
So it's like a purge of anybody who dares to question anything that he's proposing.
It's like a sort of rite of passage almost. What he's done is said, okay, I'm going to do this thing. It doesn't actually save any money. It doesn't do anything but harm to older people, but I'm going to do it. If you defy me, you're in trouble.
That sounds similar to our political heritage in Mexico. We have plenty of that too here.
Sort of rite of passage. You've got to do this thing. You know it's wrong. You know it's stupid. You know it's bad. But once you've done it, you'll know who's in charge.
Ideologically, Starmer is progressive, and I mean, he's touted as a human rights lawyer. He's kind of an Obama type, or not even?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as that. I've worked with him in the past. He's technocratic. He has good legal analysis. He understands all that very well. He's also very Atlanticist, very pro the USA. And his big problem was that when Israel started bombing Gaza after October the 7th last year, he's then doing a television interview or radio interview, and it's televised, and they're asking him, is it right that Israel is cutting off water supplies, denying food and bombing schools? And he said, it's an act of self-defense. They have to do these things. I mean, excuse me, what possible act of self-defense involves bombing a sewage works, schools, hospitals, and taking food away from children? And he was defending this, and this did him a lot of harm.
What is public opinion like in Great Britain about this? I mean,
to begin
people
with,
support Gaza?
To begin with, they were very confused. Now, the numbers of people attending demonstrations is huge. Those of us that fought the election campaign with a clear message of saying, we will continue to demand a ceasefire in Gaza, and we've done that, and I was doing that before the election anyway, did very well. And so public opinion has moved massively. I just got a message today from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which to their credit have been around for many, many years. Another national demonstration on October the 5th. I'll be there, I'll be speaking at it.
We have here our buttons. This is Jeremy has given this to us here at TV UNAM. It's from his Peace and Justice Initiative, Global Peace and Justice Initiative, and it's a peace
Palestinian flag.
It's a Palestinian flag on a peace dove. So
Peace and Justice Project for Palestine.
A Peace and Justice Project is in general the name of your
yes, it is.
Your initiative, right?
Founded that
beyond Palestine. What else are you doing?
Oh, a lot of things. We founded it just after the general election when I stepped down as leader. Launched it, and we do a number of things. One is acts of solidarity. So we do a lot of work on Palestine. We work very closely with Progressive International and International Transport Workers Federation. We've done a lot here working with the unions on union membership in catering, hotel and transport industries. We have an annual international conference which deals with issues of global wages and attacks on living standards, environmental issues, and obviously war and peace issues, not just Gaza but Ukraine as well. And this last conference held last month had a lot of people in the hall. It was full. It was at a university in London, but we had 25,000 following it live all day. And so we're doing that work. We're also working with the Bakers Union on organising membership in big baking industries. And we're working with other unions on the gig economy of recruiting Uber riders and Deliveroo and people into membership. And we do two other things. We've got a Music for the Many program where we promote music concerts around the country to defend live music and giving young people an outlet to play their music. And we've done about 20 of these concerts, massive, huge.
Wonderful.
And we've also produced a poetry book, Poetry for the Many, which Len McCluskey, former Unite leader, and myself headed up. And that says now on its third edition, after less than a year.
And
this
your book about
this
guns.
This book, Monstrous Anger of the Guns. There, Monstrous Anger of the Guns. And this comes from a poem by a First World War poet called Wilfred Owen. Wilfred Owen comes from the area where I grew up in as a kid. And he was a soldier in the First World War and describing how soldiers died like cattle. And the words we've taken are, what passing bells for those who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns. This book is written by people from all over the world about their experience of the corruption of the arms industry, the way it forms foreign policy, the way it promotes conflict, and the way it makes incredible sums of money by the ever-rising defense expenditure without ever any consideration for peace. And so we have produced this book. We are selling it around the world, and but promoting a debate, because you have to engage with people. Those who work in industry that make stuff for armaments, vehicles, guns, bombs, and so on, they're not the enemy. They've got jobs. They've got to be protected as well. So it does require public intervention to convert those skills into doing something useful. And so we've done this book, and we're very proud of it.
1 second, Jeremy, to continue talking about the book, we got to go to a short commercial break.
Okay.
Ahorita regresamos para continuar con este gran diálogo, discusión con nuestro invitado de lujo que nos visite de Londres, Jeremy Corbyn. No se vaya. Continuamos aquí con el gran amigo Jeremy Corbyn. Gracias. Thank you very much for
My pleasure.
sticking around, for giving us a little bit of your valuable time. It's wonderful to be with you. We were just talking in the first section about guns, about war, about peace. And I wonder whether you would agree with comparison between what's happening today in Gaza and the extermination camps of the Second World War. Is that an exaggeration, or are we going through this once again?
What's happening in Gaza has now been ruled as genocide by the International Court of Justice. I was at the International Court of Justice for the hearing. The South African government invited me, and it was a poignant and moving day. Beautiful, incredible building, the Palace of Peace in The Hague, where the judges are sitting in a long row, listening to the application being made by South Africa and Israel's response, and a very small number of us in the public gallery, where they were taking unbelievably strict security measures. And I went in, as I do everywhere, with a notebook and a pencil. They said, you can have the notebook, but you can't have the pencil. Okay. Why not? They said you could use the pencil as a weapon. Well, I know the pen is mightier than the sword, but this was... Anyway, so I had to try and remember everything and write it down as soon as I came out, which I did. And I was just reflecting then. South Africa threw off the yoke of apartheid. Mandela said, our freedom will never be complete until the Palestinian people are free. And the court ruling was, as you know, that genocidal acts have been committed, as has the International Court of Justice said that, but also the International Criminal Court has then issued arrest warrants against Netanyahu and others. Surely that is enough to say no more arms for Israel, no more bombardment of Gaza, and now, today, Lebanon. And do you know, the number of bombs dropped on Gaza in the past less than a year exceeds the total number of bombs dropped on Iraq during the Iraq War.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is massive. It is the destruction of everything. And so the world has become more and more aware of it. The demonstrations have got bigger and bigger. Israel is more and more isolated. And I ask myself the question, where does this go from here?
Mm-hmm.
Israel cannot sustain two-fronted war unless it's got a lot of backing from the United States, Britain, France, Germany, and so on. And so the demonstrations are very, very important. And we've just got to keep it up and keep up that pressure in support of the Palestinian people. 40,000 dead already.
And it's brute economic interest, because politically it makes no sense, right? I mean, national security by no means is favored by annihilating families and creating a whole nother generation of freedom fighters against the West in the Middle East. National security is not served by this. It's just the industrial military complex. No, or how do you, at least in the British case, how do you explain it?
Tomorrow, if the bombing of Gaza stopped tomorrow, you've got basically a pile of rubble, and you've got 40,000 dead already that we know of. You've got the survivors' guilt of those that have lived through it, and you've got poverty, you've got starvation, you've got foul water, and you've got the most appalling mental health crisis facing the people of the future. I remember going to Gaza, I've been many times, but even in 2006, I was there as an election observer. I went to stay in the flat of a friend of mine, Dr. Muna Farah, and her family. She is the head of the Gaza Mental Health Organization, or was at that time. Her estimation then, this is almost 20 years ago, was that 70% of the population of Gaza had functional mental health difficulties. It would now be 100%.
Of course.
What are we doing? Just observing?
In Latin America, the leader who has been most vocal about this is Gustavo Petro from Colombia. Very brave, really speaking out for peace. But it should be a global outcry.
I'm looking forward to meeting my friend Petro, President Petro, on Monday for the inauguration here. And I was in Colombia for his election. I was so delighted when he got elected. Yes, he has been a leading voice for peace, but most Latin American leaders have said something or done something, and that, I think, is...
Except Milei, of course. Milei, you know, loves Netanyahu.
Sure. But most have done something. But that is a tribute to the Palestinian diaspora that is all over Latin America. And it's the European leaders and North American leaders that are the ones the most culpable in all this. Biden uses a presidential edict to bypass the Congress in order to send increased numbers of bombs.
So you're here for Claudia Sheinbaum's inauguration, visiting us here in Mexico City. A real privilege to have you. What are your expectations for the Sheinbaum government?
Well, I wish her well, and I'm delighted that she won the election, delighted she's going to be the president, and I'm looking forward to what the government can achieve. The AMLO administration has managed to take 5 million people out of poverty, has managed to give better chances to many young people, has developed an awful lot of infrastructure development. And what I hope is that Claudia's government will build on that, will build on an environmental demand for sustainability. And I would imagine in the long run a transition of the Mexican economy into sustainable energy sources. That's a big job, but Petro is doing that in Colombia. But I hope she will also address the human rights issue of the disappearances and the gang warfare, because that is appalling.
And one of the possibilities of resetting relationships between Great Britain and Mexico, we at least don't have the radical right wing or hyper neoliberal government in England. We have a real democratic hegemony of Morena here. What could be like another stage of relations between England and Great Britain? If you were the foreign minister of England, what would you
I did discuss a lot of this with AMLO 3 years ago about what we could do. And I had a number of ideas. One was the one thing that Britain is good at is railway technology. And he is very keen on developing and reconstituting the railway system. So I said, we could certainly work together on all of that. And one thing he said to me was nice. I said, what do you want? What would you want from Britain? And he said, a health service. And so I do applaud him for the work he's done on school and college developments, the fact that many more have access to good quality education, and the health service. But I do think cooperation for young people is so important. And the idea I was putting forward was that universities in Britain, my country, and here, could do a swap on the second year of a 3-year course. You've got a 3-year course. Year 2, let's let the student from Mexico or Britain swap.
Right.
So students from Britain come and spend a year in Mexico, obviously learn the language, learn the culture, and continue their studies, and the equivalent happens. That I was discussing yesterday with a number of people, the idea of that idea all across Latin America of shared students, the long-term effect of students knowing each other later in life, less likely to go to war with each other, less likely to fight each other. And so I think those sort of areas are very important. And it's about an alliance, I believe, internationally. Now, the British government's foreign policy is not my foreign policy. But there's some very interesting traditions in Mexican foreign policy. I know Mexico's had a whole series of governments of different types and so on, left, right, so on. But essentially, the non-aligned anti-nuclear war, anti-nuclear weapons foreign policy is always maintained. And despite serious human rights issues within Mexico, Mexico has a great tradition,
of course,
of accepting refugees from fascist Spain, from Pinochet's Chile, and from so many other places.
More recently from Bolivia, Ecuador, Haiti. Exactly. We're here now in Centro Cultural Tlatelolco, which used to be the offices of the Secretary of Foreign Relations. This is where all the great meetings of non-aligned countries and Latin American countries for peace took place.
So I would hope Mexico can develop even more into that prominent position where it can give inspiration and encouragement. I don't like the idea of countries leading on foreign policy. I think we've had quite enough American leadership on foreign policy. I think what we need is a sense of cooperation. But you know what's missing in the world at the moment? You turn on the television every morning, I'm sure you do, I do. We turn on a computer and you hear day 200 and whatever in Ukraine, day in Gaza, day in Lebanon. You don't hear much about the Congo or Sudan. All you hear about is a reporting of war and what the war aims are, Where's the discussion about peace? Where's the discussion about talks? Where's the discussion about diplomacy? Where's the discussion about reforming the UN to make it more effective? Those are the things that are missing. And so I do think we need to look, all of us on the left, at the role of the media. I know this. I suffered a great deal from the media's attention to my every last entrail of my life. In fact, they found things out I didn't know. And when they didn't find them, they invented them anyway, so it didn't really matter. Well, it didn't really matter whether they were true or not. It was unimportant. But we live in a world of concentrated media power at the same time as we all have the technology to find out anything from anywhere in the world. What are these algorithms doing? You turn on an algorithm. I don't know what sport you enjoy particularly.
Baseball.
Okay. So I'm very sure when you turn on your phone, you're getting baseball results popping up in front of your very eyes. Now, I have an arcane interest in disused railway lines in Britain. So I turn on my phone. Here's a story about a disused railway line somewhere. Okay. It's not necessarily the thing you want to read at 7 o'clock in the morning, but it's there. And it's now that's all. Your baseball, my railways. That's all pretty benign. But look at it another way. What's it telling me about war? What's it telling me about economy? What's it saying when it says economic success is a minority of very wealthy people up here, and some other a little bit will trickle down, trickle down, trickle down, and the guy out there is working with delivery might get something from it. And we're just actually being corralled into a sense of political principles and understanding which we don't know about and don't want, and we're driven into it. We've got to look at this. Very interested in what the Swedish Green Left are doing on this. They're looking at a conference next May in Malmö about setting up alternative media systems. I think very interesting.
That'd be very interesting. Well, from the UNAM here, our program on democracy, we have set up something called the Tlatelolco Lab, which is a democratic observatory of social networks and digital democracy. And so we're definitely trying to do that. And when you're talking about youth exchange, I think this is very important. I met my wife in Chiapas. Irma and I met each other in the International Encounter for Humanity Against Neoliberalism, organized by the Zapatista rebellion in 1996.
Well, it was a kind of marriage movement,
and we got married. Actually, a bunch of couples were made at that engagement. So I think that kind of youth encounters or exchanges, like you mentioned, can really be transformative.
In 2017, brought lots of couples together. I keep getting invited to all these weddings.
By the way, your election, we didn't mention this fact, we need to mention it. 2019, when Jeremy Corbyn was candidate for prime minister, he received more votes than Keir Starmer.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a very important fact to point out, because Keir Starmer, Labour comes back with Labour, but it's basically because the right is fighting amongst itself, not so much because Keir Starmer is suddenly the great visionary.
He got much less votes than I did.
What was the absolute numbers, right?
700,000 less than I did.
Really?
And several million less than I got in 2017.
If you had been candidate in 2024, you would have won too, or even better, right? So this is important to not read this as, the victory of moderation. Until we got rid of the radicals, then we could finally win. No, actually, it's because of the radicals that, you consider yourself radical? Is that a word you apply to yourself?
Whatever word you want. I don't know. I mean, I call myself a redistributionist.
There you go. It's because of your work.
Come on, we're in a university. Let's be academic. A redistributionist.
There you go. So it's because of your work that you set the bases for Keir Starmer's victory later.
And we challenged the whole concept of neoliberalism and austerity, as did Bernie Sanders in the USA. And it's quite interesting that a couple of years ago, the Financial Times conceded that the arguments against austerity had only gained currency because of Bernie Sanders and myself proposing something very different and very radical. And so on the left, there has to be a confrontation against neoliberal economics, which is about the trickle down. The idea is that you grow the economy, reduce the tax burden on the very wealthiest, and somehow or other the poorest are going to do better, whilst at the same time you're slashing funding for health and education and housing. It's complete nonsense. If you want to have a happy society, you invest in all those things, and you invest in young people, and you invest in diversity in education. So it's not just technical, academic, mathematical education. It's also music. It's also poetry.
Of course.
It's also imagination. You want a creative society.
Exactly.
You get a creative society by giving people the security. Now, I'll ask you a question. What's security to you?
What is security? You have human security, public security, national security, but it's feeling safe.
Your society.
Feeling safe is the idea. If it's human security, it's the ability to develop your creativity, your life energies.
That's right. It's the security is when you know you've got something to eat, you know you've got a roof over your head, you know your kids have got a school and a doctor, and you know that when you stop working, you're not going to starve. That's real security. I was asked during the 2019 election, very right-wing newspaper called the Daily Mail, you must have heard of it. They said, we have this big event where I'd launched the manifesto, and we gave all the big newspapers and channels asked one question each. So it was quite a long time. And this person from the Daily Mail said, Mr. Corbyn, are you a patriot? Because I'm always accused of being unpatriotic. So I looked straight at him and said, yeah, I'm a patriot. And he looks at me like this. He said, how? I said, I want to be proud of a country where nobody's starving, nobody's sleeping on the streets, every child has hope and opportunity, and nobody is waiting desperately for a hospital appointment. I want to be proud of an equal and just society, and that's the message I want to take to the rest of the world. Security doesn't come from the ability to kill other people.
Wonderful. On that note, let's go to our second commercial break, and we'll come right back to continue talking to Jeremy Corbyn about his vision, his practice, his present participation in global transformation. Ahorita regresamos. Pues aquí estamos con Jeremy Corbyn. Gracias por seguir con nosotros desde el público y gracias a ti, Jeremy, de veras. Thank you very much for your time. So politics, we need to reinvent politics. That's what you've been trying to do. You've been doing, in fact. You mentioned Bernie Sanders, Progressive International, Morena, the party of Mexico, which is now completely dominates the political scene. We now govern 24 out of 32 states. Both houses of federal Congress, a new president from the same party. But this idea of doing politics differently has somehow been elusive. It's a good idea, but how do you actually do it on the ground? How do we go from this discourse to action? What does it mean to do politics differently?
When I ran for leadership of the Labour Party in 2015, I did it as almost an insurgency. We were able to recruit a lot of people into the party to vote for change, and we won. I completely underestimated the logjam of party bureaucracy. I wanted to appoint community organisers so the Labour Party would be transformed from being a parliamentary focused electoral machine into a force in the community. Bit like the Workers' Party in Brazil. That's that's where I got the ideas and inspiration from. I had the most horrendous battles to get community organisers appointed, and that was one of my deepest regrets, that it took so long to win that particular battle. Entrenched bureaucracies. And it seems
just on that point, what was the resistance from? The bureaucrats didn't want to give up power, or they didn't want to give up money to hire community organizers?
A bit of both, really.
Or what was the...
They didn't want their power undermined. They wanted to control what they did. They didn't want them working quasi-independently within the community, and in some cases creating problems for Labour-controlled local authorities. Well, democracy in politics only works when there's a creative strength there. And so if a local authority is not treating its residents well in, say, a housing place, then people are going to object. Do you shut people up for objecting, or do you listen to why they're objecting? I know what I would do. I think I know what you would do, which is probably the same. And so I've now developed the ideas much more of community organising and a local forum. So in my own case, I promised that I would report back, and we held the first forum, as I said. A lot of people involved, a lot of people coming along. Very exciting.
You're having monthly
roughly
meetings with your constituency.
Yeah, yeah. But there's plenty of others doing the same. My friend Andrew Feinstein, who ran against Keir Starmer in Holborn and St Pancras, a neighbouring constituency, and we're promoting those all over the country. They will very quickly morph into a collective voice against austerity, a collective voice against the fuel cut, a collective voice against something that's utterly monstrous in Britain. Large families get less per head in benefits if they're in receipt of benefits than smaller families. So there's a limit. Only the first 2 children are entitled to child benefit. If you've got a big family of 5, 6 children, and I have many, we have an Orthodox Jewish community in my area. We have a Somali community. We have others that actually traditionally have quite large families. They're very poor. I go to the food banks in my area. Who's there? The mums and dads of the poorest families. Well, what are we doing if we're deliberately impoverishing those children? And so those are campaigns we're going to be mounting. And then also, I think you have to lead on to much more advanced thinking on the left about economy. AI is here. The gig economy is here. The gig economy empowers the very richest, makes the very richest very rich. Where has money from Amazon, Elon Musk, etc., come from, other than a lot of low-paid workers all over the world? So we need to strengthen union organization, hence the PJP's interest in campaigning with Amazon workers and Starbucks workers. And that's why we've got to start thinking more creatively. Look, the technology that's available ought to be something to redistribute wealth and power. Now, just imagine you've got a mobile phone in your pocket. Most people do. Where does the coltan in that mobile phone come from? I'll tell you. Congo. Democratic Republic of Congo. One of the most mineral-rich countries in the world. Who's mining it? Children. They're digging it out of the ground, sticking it in sacks, which are then taken to Rwanda, and then it's sold to the world's mining companies, Glencore and all the others, buy it there, and there it's seen as respectable. And they say, no, we wouldn't dream of using child labour. We're not that kind of company. Yes, they are. They're damn well living off it. And the people in the Congo can't even afford to buy a mobile phone. And so that's an example of this sort of global chain, supply chain, and the power of global corporations. And that's why the left has got to be much more globally organized in challenging these powers.
We had a moment about 20 years ago in which there was a major uprising of global protests. I mentioned the Zapatistas starting from 96 up through the WTO protests, the World Social Forum, etc. We had this moment, and then we had the left-wing moment in Europe, from Greece to England to France to Spain, in which it seemed like we might get a massive switch to the left in Europe. We have had it in Latin America with left-wing governments, but this global resistance, I don't know where it went. How can we? We have these protests against the protests in favor of Gaza and the university campuses.
Very important.
This last year have been an inkling of the beginning of something, maybe, right?
But every time there's a movement, an uprising, a protest, it doesn't always win. You don't win every battle, but you lose every battle if you don't fight.
Right.
Now we're commemorating something that was absolutely horrendous that happened in 1968 here in Mexico City. Absolutely horrendous. Those that lived through it and those that were involved in experienced by it, they learned something from it.
Of course.
And the World Social Forum movement, the various events that we organized, people learned from it. Through the Progressive International, we're now pushing a new international economic order, challenging global corporations, challenging the power of investor state protection against national governments, all those issues. We're working on that at the moment. We've got the technology and ability to communicate with people incredibly quickly. I mean, I just have to pinch myself sometimes. We have a cabinet organized through the Progressive International. We meet once a month by Zoom, of course, and I'm sitting there somewhere, wherever I happen to be at that time, having a one-to-one discussion, just like I'm talking to you, with somebody in Senegal, somebody in Chile, somebody in Thailand, somebody in Delhi, and somebody in New York. We can do that. So if we can talk to each other like that, we can mobilize in the same way.
And I think that's what the younger generations are looking for, a global cause, right? I mean, we have, of course, many causes out there: environmentalism, feminism, perhaps the two big movements which are generating excitement, because youth are looking for
free market
excitement.
isn't going to save the environment. Free market economics is not going to save the environment.
And what do the youth in Great Britain say today? Do you feel like there's a new generational push for change, or are they being beaten down by neoliberalism and by these social networks, which Elon Musk, you mentioned him, Mark Zuckerberg, the last thing they're interested in is that these platforms being used for social change.
I think there's a lot of people who are very active in different single issue campaigns. In my country, it's on housing and it's on health and it's on environment. We've had a period of considerable trade union activity, most of which has been successful. There have been quite big wage rises won as a result of it. And there is an attack on the whole idea of austerity economics. Now, there's going to be a big test coming up for Starmer's government. At the end of October, a month's time, the 30th, is going to be the annual financial statement, the budget. Well, what's that going to be? Is that going to be new money going into health, housing, education? Is it going to be increasing corporate taxation and a wealth tax? Or is it going to be yet more austerity? Well, I know what I want. I'm not confident I'm going to get that, but I know that there's going to be a big mobilization around it. And so you don't win any political change, you don't win any social justice without mobilizing people to achieve it. No great reform ever came from the top.
You mentioned fiscal reform, taxes. That's a necessary part of any progressive agenda, right? I mean, we really need to think about raising taxes on the most wealthy. I ask you because in Mexico, this is a taboo topic. No one dares to talk about it. Outside of the academia, politicians are like totally freaked out about it.
It was a taboo subject in the British general election that both parties essentially agreed they wouldn't change anything in the taxation. Well, if you agree no change in taxation, no public ownership, and you rely on growth in order to expand your services, well, nothing's going to happen. You're going to have exactly the same. And so, yeah, we've got to face up to the issue of a wealth tax on unaccountable wealth. We have to face up to that. And also, I think, take the poorest people out of taxation altogether. Take them out of taxation altogether and put it on at the other end.
Eliminating
not easy,
value-added.
it's not popular, and the media won't like you for it. But I had an argument once with the big business organization in Britain. I went to their conference. There was about 1,000 chief executives in front of me. And I turn up there to explain my plans. So I said, listen, before I tell you the good news about my taxation plans, because I know it's what you want to hear, can I just ask you a question? When you've had a nice weekend and you've got a nice time, you've been out in the country, been with your family and so on, and you go back to your office on a Monday morning in the City of London, do you feel happy stepping over a homeless person to get into your office? Do you feel happy that a fellow human being doesn't have anything? That's what we want to change. And that's why we're going to increase taxation. You've got to.
And what was their response?
Well, interesting.
Demagogue, right?
Not all of them.
No?
Not all of them. Some were said, yeah, fair point. If say, but how tough's it going to be? But they weren't all totally opposed to it, no. Because some of them recognise that you cannot have a grotesquely unequal and successful society. If you look at the World Happiness Index, which countries do well out of it and which do badly? The ones who do well are those that are not at war and have good quality public services. Those that do badly are those that are and have massive inequality.
Of course. And it's such hard sell in Latin America. I don't know why in Mexico, because we have such an unequal economic distribution, and there's such a long tradition of privilege and of oligarchy, right?
But isn't that the history of Latin America? That Bolivar only did half the job. He did this amazing journey all across South America, gained the independence for pretty well the whole continent, but didn't get to do the rest of it, which was the land reform, which was the equality, and was the opportunity. And so you have that legacy of colonial land ownership, which was inherited by all the newly independent countries.
Mexico is relatively an
Different,
exception.
it was
in this
different,
matter.
it was
We had a
different.
revolution. Half of the land was half of the arable land
I
was
did say South
redistributed,
America, not Mexico.
but we still have this
Yeah.
tradition of oligarchy, of course. The big thing is also that we need help from the international community, because if you increase taxes, of course, you get capital flight. So we need controls on tax havens, which to me is one of the great irresponsibilities of the global community.
And
At
you
least
need
that
global
should-
agreement on corporate taxation.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you end up with a beggar thy neighbor policy of each country trying to outdo the other with tax havens, tax-free zones, etc., etc. You have to have global agreement on levels of corporate taxation. So that removes the hiding places.
Exactly.
I mean, I assume the public services are quite good in the Cayman Islands. They ought to be. They ought to be with the amount of money that's gone there.
Yes, it's that's one of the big issues. And so we're getting to the end of this wonderful conversation, dearest Jeremy. If you could send a message to the youth of Mexico, to the students of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, which is still public, free, 380,000 students who don't have to pay a dime from high schools through college up to graduate school. What would you like to say to them?
I want to say two things, that and then something else. Being young and being at UNAM and being at free universities in Mexico is an achievement that was made by your ancestors. This glorious history of social justice, equality in Mexico goes back to Benito Juarez, goes back to the revolution, goes back to Cardenas, goes on to the AMLO administration and others now about creating a better and more just society. Take every opportunity with both hands, but however good and however brilliant you are, whatever you do in life, put something back. Inspire the next generation. Make the world a better and safer place for the next generation. But above all, be creative. Don't be afraid to dream. Don't be afraid to think. And don't be afraid to be hopeful for a better future. Our planet's got to survive, and we'll only do it by sustainable economics. And the last thing I want to say is to give you a present.
Thank you.
This book, which we've talked about earlier, I've got an inscription there, you. John, our friend John, a great militant for a world free from war. Jeremy.
Thank you very much, dearest Jeremy. A real privilege to have you. We'll read this with great attention. We have to get it translated to Spanish.
That's the idea. We're going to try and go find a publisher to get it done here. And obviously we can amend, we can add a chapter on, there's some stuff on Latin America there, Vijay and others have written, but we can put other stuff
Let's
in
do a
there.
new version,
So
Spanish version.
we see it as a live book. We want it to promote debate and discussion. If people don't agree with it, fine, great, come and tell me.
Wonderful. Dearest Jeremy, a wonderful friend of Mexico, of Latin America. Visit us again and again and again soon, because we need that spirit, that hope, and we're going to try to live up to these great ideas. Struggle for peace. Mexico needs lots of peace as well. We're in the middle still of a violent situation with the drug trafficking and internal conflicts. And your example and your words are very heartening and very inspiring. Thank you very much. Thank you. See you next week. Nos vemos en 8 días para nuestro siguiente programa de Diálogo por la Democracia aquí en TV UNAM. Muchas gracias.